1970, the Ohio National Guard was called to Kent for civil unrest, students protesting the Vietnam War in the downtown area and burning a building on campus. But on this day, the unthinkable happened. Opened fire on unarmed protesters. In 13 seconds, 4 students were killed. Allison Krause, Jeffrey Miller, William Schroeder, and Sandra Shearer.
John Hare from Freedom Pharma. I'm 73, so back in 1970, I was 19 years old. And 1970, May 4th, was there was riots going on and uprisings and protests going on, mostly in the United States, about the Vietnam War. You know, kind of a lot like what's going on right now about the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine, and you know, basically young people on campuses were criticizing the government for being involved in the war in Vietnam. And you know, I think 50,000 Americans finally died in that war, which, you know, in the grand scheme of wars, you know, is maybe not high by, you know, certain standards. That, you know, today actually is also Victory Day in the old Soviet Union, where in that war, I think 27 million you know, Russians and Eastern Europeans died fighting the Germans. But anyway, 1970, I guess it was the 4th of May, and there was a song. Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young did a song called Ohio, and basically it was 4 dead in Ohio, and I'm sure you've heard of it. But the only reason I'm bringing that up is, you know, I was heavily involved. I was at the University of Manitoba. Really hardly any involvement at all. As a matter of fact, back in those days, it was what they had. They had the draft in the United States. In other words, if you were age eligible, which would have been 18 plus, you were eligible for the draft. In other words, they did a lottery, unlucky lottery. If you got chosen, you could be sent to Vietnam. You know, you're in the army. It was an obligation as a citizen of the United States. And so, anyway, you know, I'm living in Winnipeg at the time, and I'm going to the University of Manitoba, and you know, we had, you know, we knew obviously what was going on. You know, there were draft dodgers, and I don't know, a draft dodger was somebody in the United States who had been drafted and decided they didn't want to go to Vietnam, so they would come into Canada. So there was, you know, there were occasionally, you know, people that we would know, and less so in Winnipeg, because, put it this way, if you're a draft dodger in the United States and you're going to come to Canada, you're probably not going to come to the coldest city in the whole country. So, as a matter of fact, out in the West Coast, Vancouver, quite a few draft dodgers, if you want to call them that, you know, located there. And my sister was out there at the time, and so, you know, she knew about a lot of them. And anyway, the war was a goofy one. Matter of fact, you know, we're like I said, you know, this old Soviet Union is celebrating Victory Day today, you know, basically because that was the end of the war. Well, I don't know that they ever even had, they certainly could have had a Victory Day in Vietnam, because they didn't win, you know, so there was no Victory Day when the Vietnam War was over. But it certainly was nice to have it over, just because all of a sudden people stopped dying again, which was, you know, always the nice thing about war ending. As a matter of fact, would be the nice thing about war never starting, because you wouldn't have people dying of it. And, you know, so anyway, the only reason I'm bringing it up right now is, you know, it's sort of an anniversary of such. Just we're May 9th right now. It was a few days ago that that happened. And what basically happened is a protest going on at Kent State, you know, I think it was Kent State University in Ohio. And, you know, so the students are you know, they're protesting, peaceful protest. And I guess the National Guard came in, and for whatever reason, who knows who thought somebody shot first. Next thing you know, the National Guard is opening fire on the crowd, and 4 kids, 19 years and 20 years old, my age at the time, were shot dead. And funny enough, you know, okay, we're far removed. I mean, we're not that far from Ohio, you know, being in Winnipeg, but we're certainly not far removed from the age point of view. And at that stage, you know, at that time in my life, and everybody's, you know, at that age, you're rebellious. Most kids are, you know, and but to actually have your own government shooting at you, which the National Guard is the American Reserve, you know, army, you know, being brought in to make sure that the protests didn't get out of hand, but to literally start shooting at, you know, as a matter of fact, the guys in the National Guard might have been the same age, you know, except they're working in the National Guard, and, you know, whether or not they're taking orders to actually dispel the crowd, certainly not dispel the crowd by shooting them. Anyway, it was a big deal back then. I remember it very well. It was sad. I mean, you know, these people were our age. Anyway, sort of a funny story. We had our own little protest at the University of Manitoba. really nothing to do with the Vietnam War, but it was right around the same time. And really what was happening there was we had absolutely nothing to do with the Vietnam War. We had a strike because, you know, the people that were in charge of keeping the university clean were having a strike. And so basically what it came down to is, you know, the place got messy. As a matter of fact, there was, you know, the university is always political, but it's also a place where people are supposed to go and have fun while they're learning. And as a matter of fact, it was a ton of fun in my case. I feel bad for people who've, you know, as a matter of fact, I have I guess it's a niece of mine who's just finishing off university at the end of COVID. And so basically her whole university career was remote learning. So she never really got the university experience at all, which, you know, university experience is associating with people and everything else, but it's also the fun you have when you're there. Anyway, so most of the people going to University of Manitoba at the time were like me, and they worked as hard as they could to get through the school, but they also wanted to have some fun at the same time. There was also a group that I got to know because I actually got involved politically at the university a little bit. And most people at that stage in politics, and even myself, were pretty left-leaning. You know, in other words, you're sort of against the government. Not necessarily left-leaning financially, but left-leaning from the point of view of the man. But which has really changed lately, of course, funny enough, because the left guys seem to be working with the man more than anybody. But back to those days. So we have this strike going on, and the place is a bit of a mess. And so what they did is, all of a sudden, the student council decides they're going to call a meeting to decide whether the students would support the people that were on strike. And so, and it had been going on for about 3 weeks, and the place was getting to be a mess. There's no question about it. There was garbage around. But the night before the meeting, or 2 nights before, all of a sudden, we came to school the next day, and the place was really a mess. And I know exactly what happened. The guys who were calling this meeting, which, by the way, were all what we called at the time, they called themselves that, the Young Socialists. They were, you know, the left at the time, and they were the ones that got involved in the student politics more than the rest of us, because for whatever reason, I don't know why they didn't like to have as much fun as we did. You know, we were sort of too busy studying, in quotes, and having fun. Whereas they were, you know, they were the ones that wrote for the newspaper at the university. And by the way, I did myself. And so I got to know these guys. Anyway, so they call this meeting, whether or not we're going to support the union in favor of, you know, which would be against the administration in trying to get this strike over with. So, funny enough, probably 4,000 or 5,000 students showed up in what they call our University of Manitoba Student Union building. And UMSU, they called it. And it was crowded because most people were interested in what the heck is going on. We want to get over this strike because, you know, the place was a disaster as far as, you know, being clean. Anyway, I get there, and I'm just there with a bunch, and more than anything else, it's a huge buzz because the place is jammed. To get, you know, 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 people in that one, it's a big, big building, but, you know, you're crammed in there, and there's no seating. You're all standing or whatever. Anyway, now I'm watching the people who are organizing the meeting, and I know them because I've been working for the Manitoban. You know, funny enough, I'm supposed to be writing articles for the student newspaper. The only articles I was allowed to write were, you know, the stupidest articles that had no political, you know, thing at all. Whereas the guys that were, you know, doing the hard articles were the guys that were, you know, the head of the paper, and he was, you know, a Young Socialist and all. Anyway, so I know these guys, and I'm looking, and so they've got a head table set up, and there's, you know, 2 or 3 people at the head table that I knew from the Manitoban, the newspaper, and then there's a couple of mics that are in the crowd so people could ask questions, and then they start the meeting, so everybody quiets down. That's hard to get, you know, that many kids all crammed together to shut up, which we did, and so we're listening, and I'm sitting there with a buddy of mine. He's now living out in Calgary, and we're just kidding around, mostly probably looking at girls and who knows what we're doing, just, you know, but we are now going to pay attention because the place was a mess, and we want to hear the story that they got. So, and I'm looking at this and thinking, this isn't going to be good, because I could see who's orchestrating the meeting, who's running it. And it was these guys that I knew that, you know, anyway, so they go on, and they had people speaking, you know, so they brought up one of the women that was part of the union, and she was talking about, I work 12 hours a day and I do this and I do it. I have 4 other jobs and I don't make a living, and and I can't. Anyway, it was a sob story, which was great. Everybody listened to that. And then now somebody else came up. The union president was talking, and these poor people that are trying to keep this place clean, this is what they have to go through. The administration won't give them what they need. And so finally they were going to call a vote. And so how do you make a vote? It's not like you're just doing a private vote. It's a show of hands. And by the way, there's all kinds of newspapers. The press is there. The Manitoba, the city of Winnipeg press and all the rest, because this was an issue. I mean, as big as an issue as you can get it for Winnipeg. Anyway, so they call a vote, and basically it was, all in favor of supporting the union. No, of being, of not supporting the union, raise your hand. And so no one, they didn't give you an alternative thing. All in favor of not supporting the union, raise your hand. So nobody raised their hand because they sort of didn't understand the question to begin with. And then the next comment was, hearing nothing, motion carries. So in other words, basically, because nobody said they were against the union, they were obviously all in favor of the union. They never asked if we were in favor of the union side of the thing. Anyway, I'm listening to this, and now everybody's starting to, whoa, what's that? Do we just vote for something? Nobody even put their hands up. But some motion carried, and so anyway, I sort of went ballistic. Because I thought, this is bullshit. There's no way you can, and people are watching. There's people going to write down. The press is going to say that, the student union is 100% behind, the union. We weren't behind anybody. We just wanted the place to be clean. Anyway, so I'm sitting with my friend, and I said, and he sort of, what? Anyway, I jump up and I head to one of the mics, which I got to break my way through, probably 300 or 400 people to get to it. Anyway, so I get to the mic, and meanwhile they're controlling the other mics, and so I want to talk, but there's no way they're going to let me talk. Because by the way, I know them; they also know me, and they know that I'm probably not of their, political leaning, which I really wasn't. I'm, on certain things, yes, but just blindly support one side or the other, there's no way. Anyway, so finally the crowd starts yelling, let him speak, which was amazing. I've got this mic and I'm thinking, oh smokes, now I got to talk, and I've got the whole place listening. I said, okay, I think you just passed a motion that nobody put their hand up to vote for, so I don't think that really that should count. But a further question is, where's the administration? Where's the other side? So we can hear both sides. We're here trying to judge as to whether or not we are in favor or not in favor of supporting the union. But we haven't heard any, arguments from the other side. Oh, well, we've invited them several times. They never came to speak with us. I said, really? I said, well, they're right across the street. Because we were in the UMSCO building right across. I'm not kidding you. Not more than 50 feet outside that door, up a bunch of steps, was the admin building where the president of the university resides. That's his office. Anyway, and so, no, they don't want to come down here. They don't want to talk to us. I said, well, maybe we should go talk to them. And now the guys who are controlling the meeting, they can't have me lead the charge because that would make them less potent in the whole thing. So they start saying, well, that's a good idea. Why don't we do that? They didn't want the administration to have any say in it. Anyway, so now the charge is on. So all of a sudden, so I go back and so then people now, the young socialists who are manning them, like, okay, we should go over there and talk directly to, and the guy's name was, I won't even say his name at the time, he's long since passed away anyway, but, and he was a real straight-laced, conservative type of guy, not a guy I would have even liked as a student at all. Anyway, so I guess what happened, they literally, probably out of that crowd, I would say about 500 or so students went right across the street, right up the stairs. I think he was on the 3rd floor, right up to his office, and literally dragged him out of his office. This is the president of the university. Dragged him out of his office and plunked him on the front steps with all these kids around, now outside. But it was, it was May, so it was warm. Kind of nice day out right now. And all of a sudden he's being put on the spot, and he's got to answer some questions, which he did. He was totally pissed that he was he's such a straight-laced guy that he couldn't even think about addressing, we're just low-life students. Anyway, what really happened was, okay, we're all looking at our watches. We have to be a class to the next class. So out of the 500 people that went there, that 25 or 3,500 people didn't go there. They all went back to class. Nothing ever happened of it. The whole thing just fell apart. And so that was the end of their whole meeting. But it was just interesting how you could move people by faking stuff. Like, in other words, they had that whole meeting pre-organized. No opposition. They're gonna call a vote. Hearing nothing, motion carries. What? Why don't you ask if anybody's in favor of supporting the union? You would have heard nothing either, because nobody was in favor of either. Anyway, basically it sort of opened my eyes as to how politics can be manipulated. And you really sort of have to pay attention to that. And you can certainly see it now. I mean, it's nothing but manipulation in politics these days. But one of the things that was really interesting, so now they've taken over the meeting, and they're now getting everybody rabble-roused to go and get a hold of the president of the university. And I went back and sat down beside my buddy, where we were, and he sort of, holy smokes, what was that about? But as I'm sitting there, people are flooding by me like crazy. I don't have any desire to go talk to the president of the university or hear his side of it or anything like that. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't being bamboozled into making a vote. But one guy came up to me, and I knew who he was, one of the young socialist guys, and said, "Who paid you to do that?" Actually said to me, "Who paid me?" I'm thinking, what? Like everybody in the whole place all had that same question on their minds, just nobody was as stupid as me, basically, to get up and grab the mic. But every one of us was thinking the same thing, that, wait, you just voted us supporting something that yes, maybe no, who knows which way we're going to go, but you can't force a vote. Anyway, I just laughed when I heard that. I said, thinking, well, who paid us? And ever since that day, I've been wondering, those guys are dedicated. As a matter of fact, I've seen some of those guys. They've been in our left wing party provincially, all the way along, and they're still there now. This is like, 50 years later, they've been living as politicians, in our provincial government and federal government and stuff. I just wondered who paid them back then. Like, I don't know, maybe that was just their motivation because they were that politically inclined, but they certainly believed that I had to be paid to do what I did, which I wasn't. It was just my objection to what they were doing. But if they asked me who paid me, I'm wondering, is it just naturally they think you wouldn't do that unless you were paid? So maybe those lefties are being paid. Anyway, John here signing off. Fix yourself.